Hey guys, Paul here again with Shah, who has become, I think, the internet's most invaluable resource on the unknown history of marriage. That seems to filter into the discussions we've been having, and we're back for another round of it. Shah, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. I had a busy couple weeks. I was in Los Angeles and I did a filming of a podcast with Pearl, which should be coming out on her channel soon. And we did discuss a lot of the dowry stuff. So that'll be something to look forward to. And I also did something with John from It's Complicated in Las Vegas last week. So we got some
Great
interesting
work out of
stuff.
both of them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So super excited to see those drop. So for any of the folks out there, keep an eye out for that. So it should be a fun discussion.
Great. One of the things that came up recently was just out of one of your broadcasts, straight out of the mouth of your audience came an idea of something called the gold pill.
Yeah.
Um, and it sounded catchy. And when you start thinking about it, there's some things that make sense about it, but you want to take a run at elucidating a little bit of what that means to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, for the folks that are familiar with our prior discussions, even the ones on your channel, we covered marriage transactions like bride wealth and dowry. And what we learned specifically was that, especially what we see in the anthropological literature, is that in monogamous societies, it tends to go hand in hand with the dowry. And a dowry is a significant wealth contribution that is pretty much endowed to the bride to be at the time of marriage. And this goes to help create a conjugal fund for the new couple. So, what we see is that women have always brought to marriage a pretty substantial material and financial, wealth, which really helped to get the family going. And in contrast to what we see nowadays, which is a lot of pressure being put on young men, whether being told to be providers and this kind of thing, which I can understand, but what they seem to completely miss is how marriage was being done in not just in other far parts of the world, but especially in Western society. So we got stuff going all the way from ancient Greece, all the way through ancient Rome, all the way through United Christendom, all the way up until you know very recent English society in the mid 1800s. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And we've been studying a lot of this stuff on my channel. We've been looking at the dowry. We've been looking at how this went hand in hand with monogamous marriages and how people were traditionally going about negotiating marriage, which is something we don't often hear about too much these days. And it really goes hand in hand with a lot of the points being discussed in the manosphere. So, of the folks who've been following me on my channel, we've been doing a stream every week looking at this stuff, looking at old newspaper clippings, different forms of media from different time periods, anthropological literature, journals, and different family history journals and academic papers and stuff. And so we're starting to see this kind of very clearly what traditionalism really looked like. And what I've noticed and what other people in my audience have noticed is that there is this very real paradigm shift. I've seen it with folks like Caesar Quintana. He's someone who watches my streams a lot, and just
Good
in,
man, Caesar. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, very much so. And just in my chats with him, he's someone who's been brought up in our current culture, and he's even told me just learning about this, it makes him see things in a different way, or he's always felt that there's just something that wasn't quite right or that didn't feel right. And learning about the dowry kind of opened his eyes to a lot of stuff. So not just that, but even my discussion with Pearl, that's not posted yet, but she was just like, wow, that's really interesting. I met another content creator in Vegas. His name's Coach Greg Adams. He's been watching some of my streams, and we had a discussion about the dowry as well. So what I've seen is that there's this blind spot that's existed, and the more people I've had conversations with, we keep noticing this phenomena of a paradigm shift, and it's giving people a new perspective. So we didn't really know what to call it, but somebody in my chat, his name's Trevor, he left a chat in one of my streams and said, we should call this the gold pill, essentially. This this sort of paradigm shifting phenomena that we keep seeing happen to individuals who come across this stuff. And I can think of a very, specific kind of gold pilling moment for myself as I was studying this, and I was like, wait a minute, this is completely different than what I thought. So that in itself is the gold pilling, and it's been giving folks a completely different perspective. So we're very early into this. I mean, we've just given it a name. We know we're encountering a phenomena that we've witnessed. Where it goes from here, I believe very much in an organic process, and we're kind of watching how this develops, basically. But people are really liking the term gold pill right now.
I think as you alluded to, there does seem to be some sort of cultural blindness to the historical fact that there was a time, for a very long time, that women were expected to bring value. You talked about the conjugal fund of the marriage. And I wonder sometimes if it wasn't the romantic ethos that put the quietus on uh, bringing this into discussion, because in the romantic model, the woman's worth is intrinsic. Just the idea of questioning whether she brings anything else other than herself seems to be a romantic affront. So, and I think it's gone as far as that a lot of what we would, I guess, call trad cons out there, they've conjured up an image of traditional marriage that is totally divorced from reality. Their idea only goes back 100 years or so, and that's it. It's a
Yeah,
newbie.
I can tell you that we see that very clearly in the newspaper clippings. So Peter Wright, who runs gynocentrism.com, he has access to a lot of newspaper archives that go back all the way to the 1700s. And these are comprised of a lot of different newspapers and just things that were that were published back then, in England. And so he's gone through and he's done queries for looking for the dowry. And what you see is a very clear raging debate between what's called, marriages of romance or the love match, as I've seen it described before, versus marriages of reason, which is what they would even refer to themselves as the traditional marriage. If you'd allow me to share my screen here, I can actually show you
Sure.
something that Peter Wright sent me, and it's the queries and the time period. So I'll go ahead and just share my screen there. What this
Yep.
is actually from this newspaper database, and it's showing how many times the word dowry is being mentioned here. And one thing you can see is that it's going from talked about very little to this steady increase until it reaches a maximum point here between 1850 and 1899. And then it starts to go out of discussion again. But what this is really showing you is that there was a raging cultural debate going on around this time period. And it's actually reflected in the article. So I have a couple articles to share with you today that are from 1700. And then you can see as we get to around these periods, this is where they're starting to discuss, should we go back to the dowry? A lot of people are unhappy with love marriages. Why aren't English fathers doing what the French are doing for their daughters, which is providing them with the dowry? So we start to see these very interesting discussions happening, and by the time we get to our time period, all of this stuff is virtually gone, basically. So it is just it's it's just exited the conversation, and that brings us to today, which is with the trad cons and stuff like this, who kind of refer back to this 1950s model of marriage. And it just they'll call that traditional, going all the way back to time immemorial, and it's just not true. So I'll go ahead and just move this, and then I'll share. What I'll start doing is taking us through some of the newspaper clippings, and I'll try to
Okay.
read the first couple faster because I know we're probably pressed for time a little bit.
No, we're good.
Okay.
This is interesting stuff.
So this is from 1700, and it's from what's called the Carlisle Journal, and that's 22nd February, which was a Saturday. And I'm just going to read this real quick because it's just going to give you a brief window into how marriage was viewed in 1700. So it's called A Maiden Stratagem. Uh, the Protestant Mercury of 1700 relates rather a romantic story connected with the subject of wigs, which proves the affection of the heroine and the value of the article in question. An Oxfordshire lass of great beauty was beloved by a young man of considerable merit, but far too poor to wed a dowerless bride. The girl traveled to London, saw a chapman in the Strand, and entreated him to purchase her hair, which was light, silky, and of great length, at the usual price. The bargain was struck. The wig maker gave £3 an ounce for her hair, which weighed 20 ounces, and the errant damsel returned to Oxfordshire to wed the poor knight of her affections. So this is kind of very matter of fact, right? It's not that, oh, he should have married her regardless, right? It's saying, no, we can't even conceive of a marriage where the bride doesn't have a dowry. And then just moving forward, this is another one. So this is from 1838. And it's from the La Belle Assemblée, Thursday, 1st November, 1838. So she has, after a manner, my lady. Edward Lawrence loves her better than life itself, but his father will not hear of his bringing home a dowerless bride. And she has unfortunately no portion, which could be referred to as the marriage portion, which is another word for dowry, but her virtue and happy temper. Young Lawrence would marry her tomorrow in spite of them all. He has even knelt to entreat her to be his wife. But she knows her duty better. She tells him then to sow the seeds of dissension between father and son. And meek and simple as she looks, she is too proud to force herself into a family who look down upon her. God forgive them and pity her, for I fear they are breaking her young heart between them. Well might our worthy minister say last Sunday that the thirst of gold was a curse. So we're starting to see the entrance of this sort of debate between romance and love, but we're not quite there yet because it's still very heavily rooted in the culture. You know, this is in England, that no, marriages don't happen to women who don't have dowries. It's crazy talk.
Well, and
Basically.
the story actually makes it look like it was not within her moral code to come before a man without a dowry.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes to show that what really renders a wife respectable, I mean, in some senses, aside from, you know, maybe other values and qualities, is this thing of having a dowry and contributing something to this newly formed conjugal fund. I mean, this is a form of family planning, basically, and instead of just throwing caution to the wind and saying love conquers all. So I'll go ahead and move that forward. This is just a fun poem right here. And this one is from 1852, and it's called A Page from a Young Man's Notebook. And it's called The Maiden with the Dowry by Mrs. Abdy. So that's 1st August, 1852, which was a Sunday. And you kind of get the feeling that she's almost poking fun at the guys a little bit, but it seems to be kind of moving us towards this debate conversation. I covet not a blooming fair with form of graceful lightness, soft smiling lips, luxuriant hair, and eyes of dazzling brightness. In dulcet tones she need not speak, nor utter phrases flowery. I only prize, I only seek, a maiden with the dowry. I do not wish that she should sing Italian airs divinely, strike the guitar's melodious string, dance the mazurka finely, nor sketch with pencil bold and free scenes picturesque and bowery. To please my taste, she need but be a maiden with the dowry. There is a fact that I'll allow, a cut and dried expression. It is but uphill work just now to rise in a profession. Yet life's most rugged ways, I think, might soon grow smooth and flowery if to my fortune I could link a maiden with the dowry. Beauty not long the eye contents. Wit is a treacherous bubble. Good dividends and well-paid rents are lasting balms for trouble. And though love's sky may oft be known to look overcast and showery, no matter, so I call my own a maiden with a dowry.
Wow.
There's even a little bit of swipe at love there about how love is.
Yes, there is. Yes, there's a swipe at infatuation, at romance. Um,
Yeah,
this this is reflecting a woman's point of view.
exactly. Yeah, so this is what she's seeing, and in my interpretation, basically, she's looking at the marriage market and she's seeing what guys and what men, bachelors basically, are looking for in a woman and expecting. So, in a way, I feel like it's almost beginning to poke fun and say, what about all these other qualities that women have, but all you're focused on is dowry? So it's almost like a kind of a subtle jab, so to speak, but it's starting to open up this sort of can of worms.
Yeah, and I get the sort of gentle tacit swipe at young men with dollar signs in their eyes, uh, but at the same time, she is reflecting the sentiment of her times.
Yes, very much so. And that's the important thing. That's what I want people to understand. Because if you listen to a tradcon, they'll have you believe it was the 1950s going all the way back to, uh, you know, 2,000 years ago. So this right here is what's really enlightening. But we'll go ahead and
And that's mainly because they could not have this conversation in front of their wives.
yeah, exactly. If they dare bring it up, they'll say, "How dare you ask what she brings to the table?"
Absolutely.
This one is yet another example. So now we're in 1882, and this one is from it's called "True Love of Self," and it's from New Town Arts Chronicle and Company Down Observer, 20th of May, 1882, Saturday. True love of self. While it may not be true that money gives birth to love, it is not to be doubted that the young lady who is an heiress will average in a year more offers of marriage than a young lady who is not an heiress, even though the preponderance of beauty may be in favor of the latter. Young men do not marry for money, and yet the rich dowry of the bride is not generally considered an unwelcome encumbrance. A young German was once pressing his suit and in the midst of his ardor questioned the object of his choice as to her possible financial future. I have heard, he said, that your good father owns 2 large estates in Silesia. Yes, was the naive reply, and he owns 2 more in Pomerania. The suitor hesitated a minute, as though to catch his breath, and then, falling on his knees and looking the young lady imploringly in the face, cried out, "And can you, my darling, doubt my affection under such circumstances?" He loved the very ground she trod on and wanted to own it himself. So again, you're starting to see this opening up of maybe culture becoming more conscious of this because it's starting to pervade the newspaper and the publishing, and it's opening up a conversation. One thing that is of note to me is what I see demonstrated in a lot of the anthropological literature, the newspaper clippings and the media, and how it contrasts to what we see in the manosphere. The manosphere has no problem saying women are hypergamous. Women are looking for grooms with high incomes, high earners, essentially, status, all these things. But on the other end, when we start to look at, evidence from the past, we're seeing that men are equally hypergamous in their own way, which is by seeking, a maiden with the dowry, like in that last poem. And what we see is that, on the bride side, they're looking for a groom with high income. That's hypergamy. On the man's side, they're looking for a high dowry or an heiress, basically. And what I see is that hypergamy against hypergamy tends to cancel out. And this creates, endogamy, and it creates a kind of positive assortative matching. So it's just interesting because, especially when it comes to tradcons, they'll never bring any of this stuff up. But it really is the thing I think men should be considering, at least looking back to more recent history, in Western recent history too, because what we're seeing nowadays is a very lopsided deal.
But that contest, I'm curious of what you think about this contest between hypergamies that you described, men looking for some sort of heiress, and I'm sure in the upper 1% of society that young women of old money have no problem finding a line of suitors.
Hmm.
But the rest of the population, I don't see that behavior in men.
I don't, I mean, I would say nowadays more so, but I mean, looking at a lot of the discussions on this stuff, even back then, I mean, if you're referring to back then, if I heard your question right, men,
Well, back then, and well,
yeah.
really now
Mhm.
with young men now,
Oh
I
yeah.
guess you could say that their hypergamy is a contest for capturing beauty.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true, and that's because it's been kind of moved over into this everything the woman brings to the table is herself. And we actually have a newspaper clipping of that very specifically that goes over the dowry of beauty and that her only dowry should just be her beauty. And it's interesting to me because it's the first thing I notice is that what we're really doing is men are selecting based off of beauty. So now we have a society that doesn't value other things, and it's creating marriage off of just these kinds of qualities. Which to me, there used to be a check on beauty in the same way that there was a check on hypergamy, because you might find someone that's beautiful. Let's say you have someone, let's say he's middle class or even upper class. Let's say it's royalty or something. And if a dowry is customary and they find, let's say they're looking for a queen or something, and okay, she's the most beautiful woman in the land. Okay, that's great. But if she also doesn't come to that, that queen's seat without a dowry or without something, even if he chose her and said, I have plenty of money, the rest of the community is going to look at him and say, wow, he married her just for off of this very superficial thing. And he really made an irrational decision based off of what he could have got from a dowry that she brought. And this kind of idea pervades all the way down throughout society. So you might be a young man looking to get your trade started, and finding a woman that has a substantial dowry might help get all that set up so your guys' family can be well positioned in the future. But instead, I mean, you find this lovely young lady who is very beautiful and basically has you enchanted, and you say, I'm going to marry her. People might look at you
Yeah, and when
sideways.
you're a young
Yeah.
man that's just beginning to build a future, the romantic ethos means, okay, not only do you have to build your future, you have to build around her too right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. So it's kind of double the pressure on the man. And you'll even hear Tradcon say, well, you should get 2 full-time jobs if you have to, or do whatever you can. She shouldn't have to worry about money at all.
By all means, work yourself to death.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, it's like it almost leads to this imbalance in the marriage where that kind of wears off for her. She kind of ends up taking it for granted. She's not truly invested into the marriage. Her family isn't. And it's completely unsustainable, because the fact is, as young men can't economically, they're not going to be able to rise to meet this. So the old system that we had was a lot better. I think something people might hear is like, oh, well, that means that, you can't marry a beautiful woman. That's not true. I mean, what it's just saying is, hey, look at the women that are closer in your class that are bringing something comparable to what you're giving. This one might be more or less beautiful. This one might be more or less beautiful, but consider your options from a way that isn't just based off of a superficial thing. But what we've done
Yes,
now,
remember the absolute transience of beauty.
exactly. Yes, exactly. So, so we see that discussed, and we'll actually get to another article here very shortly. Let me just go ahead and move us over to the next one, just in the interest of time. This is actually a very interesting piece here, and this is from 1899, and it's discussing basically the states creating a dowry fund. So one thing that's interesting is that dowry and that system is something that enables a people, I think, to not have to rely so much on government. And when families consider these, essentially family planning is what this is, true family planning. When families do this, they're positioning to themselves for when, hey, the new family has kids in the future, they're not going to be impoverished. There's some plan here. There's going to be space for them. But what we end up with nowadays, as the love match has taken over, is that we have these robust welfare systems, which pretty much seem to be created to sort of catch all these broken marriages when they finally end up dissolving. And whether it's single moms or whatever, it happens to be, that are on welfare. But what we're seeing in this article is almost a sort of proto situation of the state stepping in, basically, as the culture is changing, and they're trying to drive up marriage by putting in a kind of dowry. So 1899, dowries are given for free. This is London Evening News, March 24th, 1899. And it says, providing marriage portions for young girls is the object of a government fund in Italy. it could be almost impossible for a girl in that country to be married without a dowry. And this form of charity is said to be most highly appreciated by the recipients. The annual sum subscribed for this purpose and distributed every year is 500,000 pounds. The recipient has to prove a good character and reputation by many witnesses to show that she has no means available and that the young man who wishes to marry her has a trade. So this is showing this kind of a little bit of a movement from the family moving into the state, starting to kind of be involved in this. And they're probably seeing a lot of people who aren't getting married. We start to see this a lot in England as culture starts to change. But this is just yet more evidence that a dowry is required to start a family, or you're not going to get married. It doesn't matter how beautiful the woman is for the most part.
And this is a nice little tidbit of information for people that think that the father as government started in the 1960s welfare reform movements.
Yeah, this is government daddy right here.
Absolutely. From where is this? From 1899.
This is 1899. Yeah. And this is London looking over. And, right now in London, they're embroiled in this kind of changeover of culture where people are starting to get down on one knee. Fathers aren't starting to save dowries anymore. So they're putting this in the paper and they're probably looking at like, what could we do to get more folks to get married? It's funny. It's not unlike the conversation we have nowadays. People are like, the fertility rate's low. We can't figure it out. And it just reminds me, it's kind of eerily reminiscent in a way.
So isn't it kind of strange that in a way this romantic model came in and saved fathers of brides so they could say, not my problem, he can take care of her?
We actually have a very specific article on that coming up later that discusses that, and specifically the English view of it, and they're comparing it to the French. The French were given their daughters dowry way later than the English, but the English were the first to industrialize and modernize, so to speak. So they were encountering these new changes first. So this one's called English Girls and Dowries. Gosh, I was tempted to take an excerpt, but what I'll try to do, I won't read it too fast because I know folks are listening along, but this one kind of compares the English with the French here. English Girls and Dowries, this is 1901, so we're steadily moving forward, and this is in the Northern Weekly Gazette, 15th November on Saturday. English Girls and Dowries. The custom of dowry giving is deeply rooted in France, where few marriages are contracted in which the bride has not a dowry, even in the very lowest classes. The parents of French girls will stint and starve, if necessary, to provide a dot, which is another word for dowry, for each of their daughters. Or if that is not possible, will combine all their savings to enable one to make a good match. The others, well, says a writer in the Daily Telegraph, recently they must face the prospect of becoming condemned old maids, or must join some religious order, which will save them from the slights attaching to their unmarried state. The girl and the suitor usually know little of one another. Often the latter is better acquainted with the characteristics of the dot than with those of the maiden. Affection is to come after marriage. Unacquainted with results, we should prophesy disaster. Yet on the whole, we find the plan works exceedingly well in France. To outward seeming, the average French household is no less contented and happy than the English. Monsieur and Madame appear as devoted to each other as the English couples. They sacrifice themselves perhaps even more for their children, and the children are quite as attached to and considerate of their parents. It is evident, therefore, that the dot system is not fruitful of misfortune as we should expect. The fact remains, however, that despite the attraction of dowries, French girls do not marry in the same proportion to the population as the lasses of most other countries. Why does the English girl think of the matter? What does the English girl think of the matter? Continues the writer. Her emotions are somewhat mixed. On the one hand, for her independence sake, she would like to feel that she did not go empty-handed to her husband, and on the other, she would not willingly abandon the cherished certainty that she is loved for herself alone. It would be idle to pretend that England is free from the fortune hunter, but to take the average middle-class girl, for she is the person most concerned in this question, the young Englishman does not marry her for her money, for the very good reason that as a rule she has no money to marry for. Her father may be in very comfortable circumstances and may leave her a round sum at his death. but the suitor has rarely any expectations of the benefit save in the remote future and must depend upon his own exertions to provide a home for his wife for many years. It is doubtful if more than a very small number of middle-class young men are influenced in their matrimonial choice by the lady's possessions, present or prospective. A dowry might, it is true, enable some couples to marry earlier than they otherwise could, and it might procure a husband for an unattractive girl, for alas, nature prompts mankind to choose the well-favored lasses first. But would it be an advantage to a girl to be married for her money? The English girl would rather say with Cordelia, "Since the respects of fortune are his love, I shall not be his wife." It is a curious fact that among the lower classes, it is by no means uncommon for the girl to furnish out of her savings the greater part of the humble home. Yet the average Englishman prides himself in assuming all the responsibility of providing a house and support for his wife. On the whole, however, it does not appear that the Englishman has any desire for the marriage dower, but would reply unhesitatingly yes to the query which was put concerning Cordelia. Will you have her? She is herself a dowry. So this is showing a radical change in how marriage is being done. And this is still comparatively very recent. This is 1901. And we saw in 1700 how no, people aren't getting married unless there's a dowry. But by this time, romantic love is really starting to take over society. And fathers themselves aren't even really concerned with saving dowries for their daughters anymore.
And to be fair, industrialization is allowing romance to take over.
Exactly. Yeah, and you know, we read that in when we went over the Cyprus paper. You know, you now have cheaper places for rent. A guy can go out there and there's a little bit more class mobility. So this enables him to maybe get more money than he otherwise would have in earlier times and say, well, I can just pay for everything and I love you. And so love is basically being financed. The caveat to all this, I'd say, is that in the beginning part of modernization, these fruits are plentiful. But where we are now, I think, in our own society is that we've kind of eaten those fruits a lot, and we're starting to see expenses rise, whether it's just for homes, for instance, and young couples are starting to struggle, and especially young men are being sort of overpressured to be able to provide all this stuff. But times are again changing, which is why I'm so fascinated by this stuff, because I think it kind of, you know, it just kind of looking at how tough it's been and how people are avoiding marriage. I feel like it was always tough in prior times, and people had a method to deal with that.
Well, and to me, it's just fascinating that we appeared to have gone from a society where marriage was designed to further the interest of families that became connected to each other. And then with romantic ethos coming in, it actually sort of turns it into a more of a prostitution
Yeah.
type arrangement.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, as we look around today, 125 years after this events going on, marriage is not working.
No, it's not. And what's funny is in some of these newspaper clippings, you see them saying the same thing. It's like even they saw that after a certain period of a love match, the couple might end up hating each other. In the paper about, you know, it was a couple streams ago that I did, but I went over a paper where they were looking at marriage in 19th century Germany, and they were quoting a French author as having said that if you marry for love, you can expect to hate them in a few years. And that's the place that gave us the city of romance, you know? So I think
they sort of refine that analysis. What you'll hear from most older couples that's managed to stay together
yeah,
is that it's a love-hate relationship.
exactly. So it wasn't very much different back then. I think you'll like this next article. This one's called Romance versus Reason. So this right here is very much pitting two paradigms against each other. This is the true traditional marriage of reason, which is the dowry system, versus this new paradigm of romance, basically, which is what we find ourselves steeped in today. But this is from 1906, so just 5 years after the last one, and it's from Liverpool, 12th February 1906. Romance versus Reason. An article on the two ways of marriage appearing in a weekly contemporary enunciates the opinion that romance is the chief factor in regard to English marriages, while reason holds sway in regard to French marriages. This may be so to a certain extent, but not entirely. The French people may display more prudence in arranging their matrimonial alliances, and there is certainly more business than romance about marriage arrangements, in which the chief parties are very little consulted. And the principal consideration is the dowry. But surely, even where romance has much to do with our own marriages, reason is not altogether absent in the great majority of cases. Certainly, there are now fewer foolish and improvident marriages than hitherto. So see, they're already calling it a foolish marriage and saying, I think the people are dealing with it and they're still trying to justify or say, no, this is how we're doing it better, because pure love matches are a struggle. And while romance seldom enters into consideration with the French, the dictates of reason are not always ignored by the English. It sounds like they're responding to an accusation. Many couples undoubtedly marry under the glamour of love, thinking only of their immediate happiness and regardless altogether of what may follow the honeymoon or the first few years of married life. Perhaps the one drawback about our marriage system is that English parents, who are as well able to give their daughters dowries as our French parents, do not do so because they are able to marry their daughters without dowries. They forget that here is where a little reason would help the romance by increasing the comforts of the newly married pair and so minimizing the chance of subsequent unhappiness. While we would not wish to copy French matrimonial methods, we might, perhaps with advantage, take a leaf out of the French book when marrying our own daughters. So I think, in my personal opinion, that this is highlighting the struggles that they're now encountering with love matches. And we see that today. I mean, we hear about that all over the manosphere, frankly, is that everything was good. We got married a couple years later. There was the light switch effect. She wasn't the same person. It's a dead bedroom now, whatever the case happens to be. And then at that point, it's, oh gosh, what's family court going to do to me? But even back then, they were recognizing the weak points there. And, the English have always wanted to maintain, I would say, an identity that is very much not French, but they're seeing French marriages probably in a better state. And they're thinking, okay, how do we react to this one?
I think that's one area where, honestly, looking throughout history, the French have always been a little bit more grounded than other cultures when it comes to sex and marriage. They are actually quite practical.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like right here is like a very close divide. Like when you think of dowry or arranged marriages or something, you think very, very far away. But this is basically England versus like the rest of Europe. It's France, it's Germany, it's Italy. All these places are still practicing the rich tradition of the dowry, which goes back a long time. And England is kind of the first to break away from this. So they're struggling with this new reality of the love match, of romance, and they're kind of on this experiment, of which today we have seen the results up close and personal.
And I think perhaps that the English were the first to witness the fact that people who fall in love often fall out of love.
Exactly.
And that wasn't a problem that plagued arranged marriages because they didn't fall in love to begin with. Many of them grew to love each other and
Exactly.
had very good functional relationships. That certainly, I think it speaks very highly of arranged marriages in that way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but the Brits bought a temporary marriage when they went in this direction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say so. And it's just interesting because it's like we're still struggling with the same problem. I think there's a lot of stereotypes. Like I think people might hear arranged marriage and they might think, okay, ever since you guys were kids, your parents had it figured you'd get married and you're a complete slave and no choice in the matter. But what I read is it's not actually the case. Like the fact is that there's just different considerations in marriage. And there's matchmakers and there's negotiations and there's discussions about this enterprise of marriage that's going to happen. So you're still, there is room for attraction and obviously these other kinds of things, but there's also these very practical considerations.
Yes, there are arrangements being made by people who are not having their brains flooded with oxytocin and other neurochemicals.
Exactly. It includes the family. There's a very real investment from both sides. And I think one of the reasons it works is because it's not based off of this kind of irrational love. It's based off of a mutual respect for each other. And that mutual respect goes a long way. Just to move on, I know time is of the essence here. This one is called The Dowerless Daughter. So this is from 1906 as well. And it is from the, sorry, I'm just trying to see, the Cornubian and Red Root Times, 17th March, 1906. The dowerless daughter. Of all figures in middle-class life, writes TP in TP's Weekly, I have always regarded the unendowed daughter as the most pathetic. Brought up in comfort and taught everything except the art of living and of making a livelihood. She rises on the horizon of the world with all her charms and young desires, and then she waits. Waits until the man comes forward who is willing to take all these beauties of mind and body at the price of giving her food and a bed and a home. Leave that girl suddenly deprived of parents, of home, and of money, and then the world often shrinks from her, the unendowed daughter. She is the real Antigone of the modern middle-class world. So it's just yet more evidence of what we're starting to see. But, you know, people are starting to regret that. It's basically showing at this point that romance marriages are taking over. I have one more on
and that they're not working.
Exactly. They're not working, and they're almost taking it for granted, basically. This one is kind of long, but I think it's worth it. And this is going to reveal to us kind of the feminist push for wanting to get jobs. Because there's this weird relationship between not getting a dowry and then struggling on the marriage market for certain women, and then saying, well, if I'm not going to get a dowry and I can't find a husband soon enough and I'm going to become a spinster or an old maid, at least let me be able to work or whatever, or have an education. Dowerless Girls, How to Eliminate These Superfluous Women by Elizabeth Sloan Chesser. And this one's 1907, 20th September, 1907. This article is republished from the Daily Dispatch by arrangement. The unendowed daughter is one of the most pathetic figures of this age. Left alone in the world without support and without any training to enable her to earn a living, she has to fight against heavy odds for her daily bread. She knows the meaning of loneliness, sickness, and poverty as well. She has often been delicately and even luxuriously brought up by parents who never dreamed that their daughters would one day have to work for a living. Uneducated to all practical purposes, for of what marketable value is a smattering of French and music and drawing room accomplishments. Untrained for any sphere save that of the mistress of a well-ordered household, without money capital behind them, it is any wonder that many come to grief. What pathetic revelations occasionally come to light, what tragedies exist of which the world never hears. The upper middle classes are very conservative concerning the woman movement. So these will be, your kind of first feminists. The professional man who is making an income of £1,000 to £2,000 a year does not like the idea of his daughters becoming working women. Why should he permit them to go out into the world and absorb advanced unwomanly views of life, to become hardened and unfeminine, when he can keep them comfortably and even luxuriously at home? These are the views of the old-fashioned father, well meant, but how mistaken and wrong. Where she comes from. It is from the ranks of the professional men, the clergy, the army and naval men, the doctors and lawyers and scientists that the unendowed daughters come. A girl belonging to this class is brought up in every comfort, but if she fails to marry and her father, whose brain is his capital, dies suddenly, what is to become of her? She has been taught nothing of any practical value. What chance has she against the daughter of the small tradesman who has a degree or teaching certificate at her back, or who has the qualifications of a first-rate typist or clerk? The daughters of the lower middle class also have not been so delicately reared, so luxuriously brought up, they can rough it better if fate compels them to face the battle of life unaided. The professional man, as a general rule, has no money capital to leave his family. The small tradesman who has lived at the rate of £200 a year may be able to leave his family £5,000. And this is kind of showing that folks from the lower classes still can't really finance romance. So they're still planning strategically, where people who are becoming very comfortable from modernization are kind of leaving it. And then later down the line, we see even the lower classes start to adopt this. Parents and careers. Parents ought to be made to realize that they have responsibilities towards their daughters, especially nowadays. When the position of women has altered so much, it is a crime if a man who cannot leave his daughter financially independent fails to provide her with a sufficient education to make her own way in the world. So many parents grudge the money spent on the daughter's education. The sons must first be considered. The daughters are a very secondary matter altogether. But if parents only knew what it means for a girl to have to work who is not educationally fit or practically equipped for the battle of life, they would not grudge the 50 pounds or 100 pounds, which, judiciously expended at the right time, would make all the difference to their daughter's future. Overcrowding and competition. It is far better to give a girl a good marketable education at the proper age than to leave her a few hundred pounds 10 or 15 years later, when she may have passed the marrying age and the receptive period, when it is easy to work and profit from educational advantages. What place can the untrained girl hope for amongst working women in these days of overcrowding and competition? She may, if she is sufficiently young and smart, become a West End shop girl with 10 shillings a week and her keep, or a music teacher feverishly attempting existence on £1 a week. She may, poor soul, try the stage, or the thankless, miserable, overcrowded career of the lady help. She can hardly hope to make a prosperous livelihood without the necessary capital, which a useful education would have given her. Of course, the marriage is often a way out, but marriage can only be regarded as a possibility. And the part I really want to get to here is parents' criminal negligence. But let's go and just read this. 1 million more. There are 1 million more women than men in the United Kingdom today, so that matrimony as a solution of the problem of the unendowed daughter cannot be depended upon. There are not enough men to supply husbands for the available women. What is to become of the girls who do not secure eligible husbands? Who it is said are becoming scarcer every day. Girls can no longer be brought up to feel that marriage is certain or even probable, and the day when man was willing to harbor all his dependent female relatives, his spinster sisters, and maiden aunts is no more. The only way to ensure a girl's future is to give her a decent and common sense education. Without that, a girl has no chance if she has to compete against other women thoroughly trained and equipped. Every girl ought to be educated to some trade or profession unless her parents can leave her sufficient money to live on independent of work. Parents' criminal negligence. Marriage should be regarded only as a possibility, and although a girl ought to be grounded thoroughly in domestic affairs, she should have at the same time some definite training, fitting her for self-support. The man who leaves his daughter to the chance of finding herself adrift and handicapped by lack of training is criminally negligent. I would give every girl a fair chance in life, not by providing her with luxuries, but by educating her so as to give her strength of character and practical capacity. The domestic subjects alone offer a large choice. The domestic science schools all over the country provide excellent training for girls in cookery, laundry, dressmaking, and housewifery generally, fitting them at the end of 1 or 2 years to earn their daily bread decently and with moderate comfort. I could just read this last part. I know I'm kind of beleaguering the point, but this is really giving you an idea. It's called the Dowless Girls. And it's talking about how tough the marriage market is becoming, even though a lot of women might be relying on beauty and their, enchanting skills to get a man to marry them. A lot of them are having a hard time. And so this is where you start to see the birth of the women's movement, as it's called in here, or feminism.
Yeah, this is feminist literature.
Exactly. And she might even be, like, you can kind of tell she's definitely slanted. She may not even want the dowry. She just may want this for her own reasons. But you're starting to see this as part of the debate, basically.
And one could almost make the argument that this is evidence that romance has ended up essentially leaving women on their own.
Exactly. Yeah, very much. I mean, the other article called it, the 2 ways of marriage, romance or reason. And reason is where you're going to see family planning and things. And it's about the kids. It's about making sure the wife is good. Like, it's about so many different things to ensure a successful marriage where these very practical pressures don't pretty much come and dissolve. And even nowadays, I mean, a lot of marriages end because money issues and things like that. Or if you're going to marry for romance, as soon as the romance dries up, then every other little thing that's an issue is just going to break the camel's back very easily. This is 1918, Dowry of Beauty, Gift for Every Woman. And this is 6th February, 1918. So Dowry of Beauty, Gift for Every Woman and Girl. Every British woman and girl has a dowry, quote unquote, worth far more than money or property. In other countries, the dowry, money or property, plays a prominent part in all marriage contracts. Only in Britain is a woman's beauty considered an all-sufficing marriage dowry. Only there do we read of so many marriages of the aristocracy with women whose beauty is their only dowry. So now we're seeing the changeover really take effect. It's still discussed a little bit, but you can see this is going to lead us into the sort of Barbie era that we see.
And I don't think it's any accident that this and the legend of Sir Galahad come from the same place.
Yeah. Well, what's funny about this too is that I don't know if I have a specific clipping, but it's like there's this kind of shame that, like it's almost like the father is shaming the son-in-law and say, you should just be marrying my daughter for her beauty and not what she brings. And then on the other end, he's saving a little bit money so he can probably play this keeping up with the Joneses mentality, which it seems like a lot of these families were doing. As class mobility became a thing, I think families were probably using, I have read in some places that they're trying to maybe they're not saving for these kinds of important things. They're spending money on, trying to beat the neighbors and stuff like that and to put a show on. You know what I mean? So this is the changeover in real time with these newspaper clippings. And a big shout out to Peter Wright with gynocentrism.com, because this is like a time machine for us to really go back and see what was going on. I got a couple more here. This one is from 1920. And it says, marriage dowries not likely to become popular in Britain. A prompt rejoinder was made yesterday by Mrs. Henry Fawcett to a Daily Graphic correspondent suggesting that the British bride, like her French sister, should be provided with the dowry. I don't believe dowries would become popular in this country, she said. They are alien to our notions, impracticable, and foreign to our whole domestic organization. I would do all I can to promote good wages and thus give women an opportunity of saving for their marriage, she said. The French peasants are perhaps too economical in the matters of dowries. Some almost starve themselves in making desperate efforts to provide a little fortune for their daughters. An important fact bearing on the question, Mrs. Fawcett added, is that before the war, there were only 370,000 holders of government securities in this country. Now there are many millions, and a great many of these are domestic servants. So now you're seeing, like, this sounds kind of like a feminist, just by and large. And it's just like, no, we'd rather have jobs completely at this point. It's never going to work here. Romantic love has taken over. And, these French people, they worry too much, or they're just way too practical about it. And look, they even have to starve themselves to do that, which sounds like a little bit of shade being thrown that way, or even a kind of propaganda, depending. But that is this very real changeover that's happening now.
I got to give a little bit of credit where it's due. At least she acknowledged the necessity of women saving money for their marriage. Now, for a woman to get married, she has to spend the guy's money.
Exactly.
In large amounts.
That's another weird thing, too, because, like, even when I look at TradCons, it's like if women and men are getting married, when they're 29, 28, 30, whatever, and it's like a man can't ask, what have you done from 18 to 28 or 29? Okay, you got your degree. You've been working. What have you saved? I mean, how much are you going to add to the down payment of this $500,000 house we're trying to buy and all this kind of thing? If it's up to TradCons completely, it's like, no, you should just marry her. And, that man protects and provides. And it's this very simple reductionist view of the whole thing that unfortunately is very gynocentric and doesn't share the burden on both parts of the equation here like it's always been.
TradCons talk 1,000 times more about getting married than they do about evaluating the character of the person you're going to marry.
Exactly.
Or anything else about them. You never hear, it's just get married, bro.
Exactly. Just get married, save civilization, do what you got to do.
Make some babies. When the court takes everything,
Well, then when that happens, they're like, well, what did you do wrong? Well, why didn't you should have paid more attention to her and her mood, and you should have did more date nights. And
if you were more of a leader, she wouldn't have left you.
Exactly. I got two more in our list. I got a ton more, but two more that I've had saved for this conversation.
Sure.
We're at about an hour, so that'll keep us right on
We're
track
doing
here.
just fine, man.
Perfect. This one is from 1927. Is love enough to marry on? So see, even when we're coming closer, there's still these questions to what for them would have been a very recent past. They could probably talk to their grandparents and hear about the dowry. But this one is Love Enough to Marry On? Success More Likely Under the Dowry System by Helen Rose. Who shows that love matches are often the most improvident unions? A marriage has been arranged. It all sounds eminently practical, but as a matter of fact, marriages in this country are very rarely arranged at all. We're the most casual nation in the world with regard to marriage. Nearly every Mary has her little lamb in the shape of a dowry, linen chest or goats, except the English girl. We are the most sentimental people in the world. Directly, two people say they're in love. We respect the heavenly fire that has descended upon them and allow them to get married. It's a love match, they say benignly, and upon that very slender foundation, they proceed to find a room in a year and rear a family. No forethought, no prevision, no provision. They're in love. That's enough. And sometimes enough is not as good as a feast. A love match is often only a little flame, but it's got to keep the poor dears warm for perhaps 50 years. A love match, as generally understood, means a marriage with every other ingredient wanting. And love is expected to flourish on pinchings and scrapings, shabby clothes, no holidays, and unpayable bills. As a matter of fact, love is rather a dainty feeder, and probably people speak of love matches in awe, because no one can see how they are possibly going to succeed. A love match means the sacrifice of everything for love, the most difficult in the world. People have to be very noble, very unselfish, very unworldly to count the world well lost for love. Yet curiously, enough people who make love matches expect much more of each other than people who marry for money or position. A rich husband doesn't expect half so much of his wife as a poor one. A woman who marries for love is much more exacting than a woman who marries for money. People sometimes look askance at the dowry system. They like to think that it is love that makes the world go round. They don't like lovers to be preoccupied with mercenary considerations, yet it is in countries like England and America, where easy marriage is admired, that marriages are most often discontented. That is because marriage is plunged into without any forethought. A wise mother once said to her sons, "Don't marry for money, but go where money is." The other mother might have retorted, "And bring a little money with you." Marriages may be made in heaven, but they have to be carried out on earth. And our social system gives the least possible hope of success for the love match. As a matter of fact, it's grossly unfair to allow young people to wreck their lives by marrying on love. It may seem unfair to look a gift horse in the mouth, but it's far wiser in the long run. It's not the fault of the young people. It's the fault of the foolish national thriftlessness and sentimentality. We are pounds wise and pennies foolish. We like to step into dead men's shoes, hope for a bit of luck. We spend money in foolish entertaining, luxuries we can't afford, things we could easily go without. It's not the national habit to save. So many girls earn their own livings now that many of them could put by for a little dowry. They don't. They spend it on clothes, the pictures, sweets, cigarettes, and gewgaws. A smart hat may catch a nice young man, but a little banking account may keep him. So that paragraph is kind of like what we're talking about. If a man asks, "What have you doing from 18 to 29?" Well, she spent all her money on just whatever she wants to spend her money on and not saving it for her future marriage. But they've never been taught to save. Their parents haven't saved. The young man who has often the same chance of saving money spends it in much the same way as the girls. When they fall in love, they get married on nothing, feeling perfectly happy. But they'd feel happier still, really, if they knew they had a nice little nest egg in the background. That's the conjugal fund that the dowry went to establish. You can't blame them. It is hard on young people to go without when all around them money is being spent recklessly. They can't see what a difference it's going to make in the future. But if only they were obliged to bring each other some kind of dot or dowry, if only their parents had to provide some sort of security, marriage would be a very much happier thing than it is. The nation is so wise with its old age pensions, its infant welfare, its creches, and its clinics, but it never troubles about the young people of the nation who are the potential fathers and mothers. Why doesn't someone start a marriage portion scheme or an engagement bonus or something of the kind? If there was something of this sort, there would be fewer helter-skelter marriages that end in disaster and dissolution, and a better chance for the marriage that may still be a love match. And this is written by a woman too, which I found particularly fascinating.
A
But
woman in 1927, which
yeah,
is even more
I
fascinating.
I kind of imagine that it must be somebody who's a mom or maybe has daughters or has seen a lot in her life to see what happens with these love match marriages, because this is just yet more evidence that, the love marriage has taken over, but people even then are witnessing the sort of negative side effect or the sort of back end of what happens after the love story is over and the glamour fades away and all this kind of thing. So this right here, I thought this was a very enlightening article. Um, I think this is the last one. I do have others, but I think that one really does drive the point home.
It
Uh,
sure does.
there is one more thing I wanted to share just to get back to the gold pill, and this is from Peter Wright, who created this, and after he's witnessed some of the gold pill stuff, that's been going on in our space, and he created a very short definition of gold pill, which I like. So I'll go ahead and read it here just to share with the viewers. And it says, based on conversations about the gold pill, the shortest description of it involves a twofold motive. Men expecting women to come to the relationship table with a material financial commitment and rejection of the romantic model, which I think we can use the word love match there. So just to bring us back, yeah, there are a ton of these articles. I mean, that is just a small helping of what we found over there. And it really paints a completely different picture of how marriages were made, how negotiations happened, and what expectations were, and how radically they've changed more recently. And, given it, if you look at the timeline of our civilization, it's just like a very recent change that we're really seeing the effects of.
Absolutely. I really did enjoy Peter's definition. Uh, Part of it, though, I'd like to add another dimension to that, though, because it occurs to me that dowry for the sake of a conjugal fund is the tradition
Hmm.
historically. But if we're talking about dowry in 2025, we're talking about a hedge against divorce.
Yeah, exactly. Because at least back then, the toughest part, and I think I see this too, is this question of family law. And it's interesting because we had a very specific family law with this system. And as love matches took over, if you're familiar with the history of family law, which I'm sure a lot of the folks who watch this channel and you are, there was a viewer in my stream, his name's Klaus, and he had a very interesting observation. And he basically said that family law had evolved in this time to accommodate the love match. And that's where you get your kind of at-fault marriage system. Prior to, United, well, you can say in Christendom, maybe not United, but going all the way back, there was only annulments. They got rid of divorce. In ancient Rome, you could have a divorce, and there were specific laws about what would happen with the dowry. Typically, it's the woman's endowment. So that would go back with her as she goes back to her original household. Or if there was children, the children would have some rights to that. And if, he got remarried to another wife and they had kids, the kids from the first one would be entitled to that, original mom's dowry if he had gotten, if she passed away or something. So there are all these laws and there's history for that. But more recently, what we saw was the love match take over. And then we saw the creation of what's essentially at-fault divorce. And I think this was something that was made in order to try to accommodate this kind of newer hypergamy that we were seeing, which was the guy has all the assets and the money. The woman is kind of relying on beauty and being a Barbie, and she can be from the Starbucks barista to, the daughter of a real estate tycoon. I don't know. But in that case, you're seeing these hypergamous marriages of people from two different statuses getting married. And one way to protect against complete disaster is that, well, if you're going to get divorced, it has to be an at-fault divorce at the very least. So if the guy didn't do anything wrong, the court can award assets based off of who's the injured party and vice versa the other way. But then what happened is we got completely rid of at-fault divorce and got into no-fault divorce and, the stuff we're all familiar with now. And it's just a complete disaster because it's pretty much a 50-50 split. There's no injured party. There's no fault. Anybody can leave anytime. The marriage contract is but a shadow of what it originally was in bygone eras. So, a lot of guys are rightfully recognizing the pain that comes with that and trying to figure out what to do. Personally, it's like, and I know this is what we talk about on the stream. I don't imagine that we're going back in time to bring back an old
No,
thing.
no, and I don't think
Yeah.
so either. I
Yeah.
never got that from what you were saying.
Yeah.
There is lessons in it though, and one
Exactly.
thing's for sure. I mean, marriage as an institution now, it's dead. I mean,
Yeah.
we can say whatever we want. You can peddle all the traditionalism you want. One, you're peddling the wrong tradition in most cases, almost always. And two, uh, guys are walking away and women everybody's walking away from marriage. Nobody wants anything to do with it. Hard to blame them.
Exactly.
Because the politics that are driving the family law now, for instance, if we got rid of no fault divorce and went back to at fault, it would breed a fault industry. There would
Yeah.
be
False.
10,000 lawyers in every state pop up saying, I can make fault for you.
What's funny is that was one of the reasons they moved from at fault to no fault, was because there was so much perjury and collusion going on that they were just like, there's nothing we can't, people don't want to stay together. It was just so painful for them that they would work together to lie.
Yep.
I would say going forward, like I've read thousands of divorce judgments just in my capacity as a child support agent. And I think researching this stuff does at least give some navigational tools to try to see what you can parlay in a very harsh environment. And I think what it does is it gives guys who might be MGTOW or say, I'm completely walking away from this, they can ask themselves the question, at least, what would it take for me to take this deal, so to speak, if I was going to? And it also gives guys the sort of historical backdrop to not be afraid to ask for or negotiate certain things. And that might not be, hey, you need to have a dowry, but it could be, if you want to talk marriage and you want to get to this conversation, let's look at the practical matters here. Okay, so you want a house, you want 2 kids. How much have you saved up for this? If the answer is nothing, all I have is a bunch of student debt, then this just isn't going to be a match that's going to work. I mean, so I think it's opening up this realm for men to begin to at least, I want to say discover, but I also want to say remember about how a marriage negotiation is supposed to go. And then when it comes to family law, I think it'll still be painful because there's a lot of things, whether it's false domestic abuse allegations, horrible custody battles. But at the very least, when the divorce happens, if you have them invested somewhat, then it's just less painful. You don't lose everything in one go or completely half of everything. It's more of at least an equitable split from that regard. But I would admit and yield that it's still incredibly challenging, so I think we're at the precipice of something different. And, I discussed gold pill being a paradigm shift. I think it's ultimately a paradigm shift in a direction that is going to be positive for folks, because it's not the same old, you're supposed to do everything, whatever it is that the tradcons kind of beat you over the head with. And it's at least opening up a new mind space for men to be able to consider, how can I go about this in a new way?
One of the things I love about it is for more traditional young men, and I'm talking about Christian men, men of other faiths who want to live a good life and want to pursue something traditional and wholesome. This information gives them a different worldview about what tradition do you want to pursue and why. Just that knowledge alone can be a paradigm shift individually for men that takes them in a much better, different direction. So I think it's really valuable stuff just to remind us where we actually came from, because right now we're living a Hollywood lie.
We
Uh,
that is a great way to put it. It's complete a Disneyified gaslighting, so to speak. I don't know what else to call it. And it was mind blowing to me to see this and to get into the mind of how they're looking at marriage, how it was originally meant to work. And we've gone so far down the love match sort of train here. Marriage laws look nothing like what makes sense for a traditional marriage contract. We have these robust welfare systems with these kind of very powerful systems like child support and things like that. It's become incredibly gynocentric. We live in a very different world. Women are taking a lot of the jobs now. We kind of saw the beginning of the feminism there. And, me personally, I look at this as a younger guy and I think, okay, I have to ultimately deal with what's in front of me. How can I best do that? It's not about taking away choice or saying we need to go to a very strict arranged marriage system or this or that, but it's about negotiation and being confident in that negotiation and not letting people challenge your masculinity and say you're not a real man if you expect this or expect that. Because as we've shown very clearly, and even in our last videos, that actually some of the most masculine men that tradcons love to refer back to had a very different understanding of how to negotiate a marriage for themselves.
Absolutely. Well, is there more?
Well, I mean, that's I have a bunch of newspaper clippings. I mean, I'd hate to drown it out too much. I know that we are pressed for time. We're at about an hour and 13 minutes. If anything, for fun, we can go over the origin of the Christmas stocking if you'd like to see that.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Okay, let me bring that up. I'll just go ahead and share my screen one more time.
Little detour is welcome.
Okay, so this right here is from 1914, and it's called The Christmas Stocking. And this was published in the Blackpool Gazette and Herald, 18th December 1914. So folks are probably getting ready for a nice Christmas Eve coming up soon and enjoying some time with family, and this is what you would have seen in the paper. The Christmas Stocking. Many years ago, children hung up their stockings on St. Nicholas Eve, December 6th. Young women in convents all over Europe also placed their stockings at the door of the abbeys. This was an adaptation of the custom of young women's praying to St. Nicholas to provide them with good husbands in a marriage dowry. According to tradition, St. Nicholas once, under cover of night, threw 3 purses of gold into the house of a poor nobleman who was unable to provide for his 3 daughters. The money was their dowry and enabled them to marry. Some claim that the shape of the purses of that day, which were much like stockings, gave rise to the custom. Gradually, the hanging up of stockings on St. Nicholas Eve ceased, and the custom was incorporated into our Christmas festivities. So just to attach on real quick, there are a lot of versions of this story, but it is a very famous story. And shout out to Cesar Quintana. He actually was the one who brought this to my attention. And some of the stories, basically what it is that there's a poor nobleman and he gets injured or something, so he can't save dowries for his daughters. And St. Nicholas is an orphan, and his parents were very wealthy, but he goes to live at the cloister and he wants to basically take on a spiritual life. So he's not super concerned with worldly wealth and these kinds of things. And what's happening is that there's no money to get these daughters married. So what this nobleman does, or this very prideful man who doesn't want to take help from anybody, is he considers essentially putting his daughters in the local brothel because he doesn't know what else to do. And most men that live there don't want to get married to a dowerless woman because you just don't do that. It's not a respectable marriage. So word of this gets back to St. Nicholas about what's going to happen to his 3 very beautiful daughters. And he knows that the man is so prideful that he won't take help. So what he does is, under the cover of night, he basically sneaks in, and he since, St. Nicholas has this inheritance from his parents who passed away, he puts these gold coins in one stocking. And then he comes back the next night, so they wake up, they see the first stocking, they say, oh my gosh, there's a dowry here for one of the daughters. This is great. Then he comes back the next night and he puts in more gold coins. And then they wake up and they say, oh my gosh, this is a miracle. The second daughter, can now get married. And then the father thinks, okay, I'm going to stay up tonight. So on the third night, he sees St. Nicholas coming in and putting gold coins for the third daughter. And that's when he confronts him and says, it's you, St. Nicholas, and he says he wants to tell the town of his generosity, but St. Nicholas says, no, please don't. I would prefer you don't do that. Don't worry. It's okay. I don't need to have an honored seat at the wedding or anything like that. But it's just interesting to me because I think every time now people look at a Christmas stocking, they can remember dowry on the one hand and how close these daughters came to, joining the local brothel on the other hand.
It opens all kinds of doors, but I'll avoid most of them.
So a fun story there for folks who wanted to stay extra and get a little extra tidbit of trivia.
That's a great way to wrap it up, Shaw. I really appreciate it. Great stuff tonight. Really been edifying.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you allowing me to come on the channel and really present this stuff. I think,
Ha-
you know,
Happy to have you here.
it's just it's exciting to me and I'm glad to share it. So I'm gonna keep on and keep seeing what else I can dig up. Peter and I have been hot on the trail. We've been on this for months, I'm telling you, just going back and forth and privately speaking and trying to piece this together. But there's so much more to learn. So that's the exciting part for me.
Good deal. Okay, folks, it's been great. We'll see you on the next round, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Take care.